This is Matt Woods. Thanks for tuning in to Backstory STL. Today's episode will be the end of the first season of the podcast. We're planning out the second season now, and it won't be too long before we have more episodes to share. My guest this week is a criminal defense attorney with his own firm in St. Louis County. He's got a front row seat to due process playing out in real time in the criminal justice system. He switched to criminal defense after a short stint in a prosecutor's office because he liked the idea of advocating directly for clients. And a few years ago, he started to share stories and advice on TikTok, which is how I found him. We got into some of those interesting stories on today's episode. Here's the backstory of Jason Korner. First off, just kind of want to get a sense of how you got into the field. So you started as at the prosecutor's office in Jefferson County.
That's correct.
Right?
Yep.
And so, what is that like a way to get experience off the bat, joining the prosecutor's office?
So that's generally the idea. I think a lot of people that do criminal defense or think they want to do any kind of criminal law in law school kind of are drawn to the prosecutor's office. They're like the good guys. That's the idea, right? Get in there, try cases, do things, not have to learn how to run your own business or anything like that right off the bat. So it seemed like a really good idea. It wasn't the right fit for me. The thing that I've really enjoyed about switching to criminal defense is I really love working with my clients. And as a prosecutor, you have victims that you represent, but you don't have clients. And I really love that relationship with my clients, and that's made this a much better fit for me.
And so at the prosecutor's office, when you first go in, what is your role? Are you actually trying cases or just kind of all the background stuff?
It's not the background stuff, but right off the bat, you're starting with things like prosecuting traffic tickets, maybe some DWIs, low-level misdemeanors, things like that. Older prosecutors will pull you in to help with some of their bigger cases or trials, and you get a chance to help prep a trial that way, maybe even sit as second chair in a trial to a prosecutor in a felony case. So that's the idea of getting the experience and learning from the older prosecutors kind of as you go up. I didn't stick around long enough for that, really. I got just kind of a cup of coffee in the prosecutor's office before I realized that that wasn't the fit for me, and I went and joined a small firm that did mostly DWI practice at that time, but I figured that was a good thing to learn to pay the bills.
Yeah. And so what made you want to go into law in the first place?
So it was interesting. When I was in college, I actually studied business. I have an accounting and finance degree from the University of Arizona. And it was funny. It wasn't until my junior year I started dating this girl that was going to go to med school. And I was like, oh, well, med school is for really smart people. And she was very smart. But I was like, wow, if she's smart enough for med school, maybe I'm smart enough for something. And then I started to see some of my friends that were talking about taking the LSAT and applying to law school. And I was like, I'm definitely as smart as they are. So this stigma of oh no, only really smart people go to these graduate programs. I always considered myself smart, but not that kind of smart. And I started to shift my idea and said, no, this might be for me. So I decided to take the LSAT, just kind of see how I did, see how I felt about it. Had all the intentions of the world of going into accounting or finance after college. And it was actually when I was studying for the LSAT that I was like, I really like this idea. This law thing really has something to it. And got some good results on the LSAT and started applying to law schools.
So is the LSAT the precursor to actually getting into law school?
Yeah, so kind of similar to the ACT or SAT for college. It's the standardized test that all the law schools look at. And it's a very interesting test because it's not a knowledge-based test. It's a logic-based test. It's really more of seeing how you think and how logical you are as opposed to what you know. So it's a very interesting kind of test, but I enjoyed it. It's puzzles and arguments and things like that.
Right. Isn't it there's multiple right answers, but there's one that's more right than the other? I've kind of heard that about. Is it one of those?
Yeah, I think a lot of tests as you start moving up into the upper echelons of academics kind of get that way. Right. Law school was very, very much that way, where you'd look at it and you're like, two of these are definitely right, but which one's more right?
Yeah, this is right. Okay, B's right, C's right, and then that's because I've seen actually on TikTok too, somebody putting an example question. It might have been the LSAT or something similar, and just the layman looking at it, I'm like, I think all these are right.
And honestly, with some of those tests, when they go back and look at all the exams, there'll be questions where they might go back and say, B and C were both right. We're giving credit for both B and C based on, the answers that were given by everybody that took it.
Right. So after you take the LSAT, and then do you just apply to a bunch of different schools and hope you get in one?
That's exactly what I did. Yep. And best information that I give to anybody applying to law school is do it early. Do it at the beginning of the acceptance window. I got my stuff in early in September of my senior year of college. I was accepted to SLU with a scholarship offer before Christmas. Some of my friends hadn't even gotten their LSAT scores back at that point because I also took the LSAT early so that I could do that. And there's just more spots available at the beginning of the process, and there's more money available for scholarships at the beginning of the process. As they're accepting people, spots are going down and money's being spent. So you want to apply when there's the most spots and the most money available.
Right. And then were you from the area, or you just happened to get accepted to SLU and then came here to St.
Yeah,
Louis?
I applied at schools kind of all around, but SLU gave me a very nice scholarship, and I liked the idea of St. Louis, so I grew up in Arizona and went to college there, but picked up and left and came to the Midwest.
A little bit different over here, not quite as scorching hot, but you got grass, so that's a plus, right?
I love the green, I love the seasons. I do miss Arizona every winter, no doubt about it.
Right. And so you've never left since you came here, right?
That's right. After law school, I really liked St. Louis. I wanted to see what it would be like to be here and not be a student. And it's just a very easy place to live. A lot of nice people.
Right. And so now, do you call yourself a St. Louisan?
Yeah. I say I grew up in Arizona, but St. Louis is home.
Right. Nice. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of people that move here, eventually you're going to catch on and, become a Cardinals fan and
that didn't
all that
take
good
long.
stuff.
That didn't take long at all.
It doesn't. You just hop on the bandwagon, unless you're from the north side of Chicago, then you might.
Right. I've grown up in Arizona.
Hesitation.
We didn't get the Diamondbacks until I was halfway through high school, so there was no strong allegiance there.
Right. The middle of the desert. There's a lot of other stuff to do besides baseball, I guess. So. So you get into SLU, you go to law school, and then join the prosecutor's office for a blink of an eye, and then you move into criminal defense, kind of see the other side, I guess.
Well, and kind of a step that happened in the process there was the interesting thing. When I went to law school, I thought I would do something business related. I wanted to be in a courtroom, but I thought something business related would fit my background and make the most sense. I said the only kind of law, I don't know what kind of law I want to practice, but the only kind of law I probably don't want to do is criminal law. And this is the naive, 22-year-old who hasn't stepped foot on a law school campus yet, just thinking that way. But I took criminal law my first year, as everybody does. Everybody likes it. It's interesting. It was great. And then I'm home in the summer in Arizona between my first and second year of law school, and I was just at a buddy's barbecue. A guy from college. His girlfriend was at a law school in Minnesota, and she was working at the public defender's office that summer. And I didn't have an internship or a job. And she was like, oh, well, it's not paid, but if you want to come, I'm sure there's a spot for you. And the next day I was talking to her boss, and the next Monday I started, and honestly, it took about 2 weeks, and I was hooked. That was it, for life, criminal law.
And so, what are the major differences between the civil and the criminal side?
So civil lawyers are always fighting about money. And that's great. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in civil law, and that's fantastic. Criminal law, I always look at it, all lawyers are fighting for justice, but, when I have my client, that person that I'm actually taking care of, and I'm the person standing between them and the government that is trying to, put them in prison or, give them probation or whatever the case may be, being that person to be able to stand between my client and the government when they're trying to take especially their freedom, I find unbelievably rewarding.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, just the fact that, a big basis of the founding of this country was on people's rights and not the government's, due process and all that stuff. Like, everybody, no matter how guilty they look from the beginning or how much evidence is against them, have the right to make their case.
And not just that, but you're exactly right. So many of the amendments in the Bill of Rights are criminal law related, and it's to keep the government from oppressing the people. But I always tell people I have one of the jobs that's actually guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, by the Constitution. It's in there that you have the right to counsel in criminal cases. And that's why the Public Defender's Office now exists, is because they've realized that, even if you can't afford an attorney, the Bill of Rights says you have a right to counsel. But I love the fact that you're exactly right. From the founding of this country, this is one of the basic principles that the whole country was founded on, was innocent until proven guilty, beyond a reasonable doubt, the right to trial by jury. So many of these things that we learn about in, grade school government class, but that really come to life in the courtroom.
Right, and take for granted, for sure.
Absolutely. The people that aren't put in that position, and lucky for them and thank God, but they don't get to see it in real life unless they have to do jury duty or something like that. But court's a very eye-opening experience to a lot of people.
And so being on that side, your advocacy for the person that the government is accusing of a crime, like, were your views when you were going to law school, like, were you very focused on like the constitutional rights that people have, or did that come along the way as you started practicing more?
So law school is very theoretical, right? They're not teaching you Missouri law specifically, even if you're here in St. Louis. It's very theoretical and more of, again, training your brain in a way to think about things. You really learn the state law much more when you're studying for the bar exam, which is just cramming for one summer after law school right before you take the bar exam at the end of July, and it's brutal. But then you're really getting more into the nuts and bolts of the laws of the state of Missouri. But really, until you're practicing in the area, you don't know anything about it. Like, you really have to see not just the theoretical side of it, what the letter of the law is, but how things actually play in practice. And that can vary even court to court around here.
Yeah. Well, and one law that us in the media really have to deal with all the time is the Sunshine Law, the open records law of the state. And most of us don't, know it word for word, but we can go reference it. We know the basics and how long they have to reply and how they have to comply with the records. And if they deny you those records, they have to cite what part of the law that they're exempt from and all that sort of stuff. And so after working for that firm in Washington, and then you decide to start your own firm.
I sat down and had lunch with a judge who I'd known from St. Louis City, Judge Mullen at the time. He's a retired judge now, but he had met me when I was interning for the public defender's office my third year of law school. I got to do some hearings and things in front of him, and when we were doing that, he took an interest and started to ask what I wanted to do with my future, and then became a letter of recommendation for all the jobs that I applied to, and just a great mentor and sounding board. So we went out to lunch one day and kind of had a talk about what I wanted to do, and I wanted to try more cases. We weren't trying cases at the small firm at that point, and I wanted to get out. I wanted to do jury trials. I wanted to be a little more aggressive with my advocacy. And I talked about, hey, maybe this firm or that firm, and he said, no, it's time. It's time to go out on your own, hang your shingle, and start practicing under your own name and building your reputation.
And what did you say to him?
I walked out of the lunch and started my own practice.
Really? It was just like
that.
All right, good suggestion.
I mean,
didn't have to really ponder it.
He has a way of talking to you, and when you're finished with the conversation, you want to run through a brick wall for him. So it was a good rah-rah speech, and I was pumped.
Very agreeable, I guess. Yeah. What do you do? How do you start from the ground up?
It's crazy. I mean, of all the things, I remember sitting on a couch with a legal pad, drawing rectangles and trying to design my business card, right? Just something so basic, but you have to do everything, right? Like, what's my card going to look like? What's my website going to look like? How am I going to do the website? How am I going to, what kind of business entity do I want to be? Registering with the Secretary of State. All those kinds of little logistical things. And I reached out to other attorneys that had their own firms to help guide me through the way, because at that point I'd made a lot of friends, and lawyers help other lawyers a lot. Most people, I don't think, realize how much lawyers help other lawyers, especially with things like that. As long as you're not fighting against each other, we're kind of all in the same boat in a certain way.
Right, yeah. Like a tight-knit community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, did you hire anybody off the bat, or was it just you for that first while?
It was me just for that first while. I mean, calls going straight through to my cell phone, trying to, set appointments, do court, do everything. I'm very fortunate to come along in the time of technology, though. I mean, to start your own practice, I really just needed a cell phone and a laptop. I mean, it could be that basic and that easy and such low overhead. So I didn't rent office space right away, and then just a couple months after I started the practice, I had a good buddy lawyer reach out to me and say, hey, Jason, I've got office space in Clayton. It's just the space I've got's almost where a secretary would sit, but nobody's there right now. Why don't you come and use it? 6 months, no rent. Pay no rent. And
wow.
I love him to this day for it. He helped, build me the nest that I was able to build the practice from, and he was a great sounding board about all the things that I needed to know about just how to do certain things at the beginning of my practice.
Yeah, that's huge, because otherwise, maybe you'd be like in your basement,
That's
practicing law.
100%. That's where it started. That's exactly where it started. So the Clayton office was a big upgrade from that, even if it was like a secretary spot.
Right, your office is just a P.O. box in Clayton somewhere.
Yep.
And so, yeah, like, and how do you attract clients when, it's just you? Was it through the internet, or just kind of knowing people already?
So early on, when I started my practice, a lot of attorneys weren't advertising on the internet yet. It was right before that really exploded. So I was very fortunate to catch that little window in there where me doing stuff, advertising different things online, I got a good return on investment from it, especially with DWIs and some other things like that, where I kind of specifically targeted certain kinds of crimes. I was very fortunate and kind of got things off the ground that way. Now, after a couple of years, everything kind of exploded. Now, a ridiculous amount of money is spent on the internet for attorney marketing, especially in the personal injury field, but even in the criminal field. So it's become so much more competitive that you do have to spend so much money to even show up, let alone, get real results from it. And that's why I've started to trend away from that. And that's why I went to TikTok for part. One, it's free. But two, I can control the message. I can have a different message every day. I can tell stories. I found it to be a very rewarding way to show people what I do, how I do it, my personality. And I've been very fortunate that I think people have responded well to it.
And so do you remember your first case when you started your own firm?
So my client number one actually happened when I was still with the small firm in Washington. It was a friend that I played softball with. Her brother got a DWI in Eureka. And he was client number one. And we got some good results in his case. I was able to win the driver's license hearing, so we didn't have a driver's license suspension. And he didn't get a conviction from the DWI either. So I was very happy with the outcomes of that. And she even told me later, if she knew that was my first client, she wouldn't have had her brother use me.
That's so funny, right?
Like, it turned out well for everybody.
Like, you're not telling somebody when they walk in, like, "Hey, you're my first client," like, because that just makes it seem like, oh, maybe this guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
It's So, but you got to start somewhere. And yeah, that's one of the things they always try to do off the bat is revoke that person's license when they get a DWI.
That's right.
So, right?
And generally you have 15 days after you're arrested, whether you take a breath test and blow over, or if you refuse the breath test. Those are the two things that are going to trigger a driver's license suspension from the arrest. Now, how it works is if you take a breath test and blow over, then you have 15 days, and that's a hard 15 days, to file something with the Department of Revenue and challenge it. And that's administratively. If you refuse the breath test, you actually have to sue the Department of Revenue in the county court. And you have 30 days to do that, but your license goes into suspension after 15 days. And then when we sue, we'll have a judge sign something called a stay order to keep the client driving legally while we have a chance to have their due process.
Right. And so besides DWIs, what are some of the other cases that you take in criminal law?
Sure. So certainly there's plenty of assaults out there, people getting in fights, even domestic violence. I handle a lot of cases in federal court now, and those are going to be things like your big drug conspiracies, wire fraud, and other white-collar kinds of cases. I have a case, Medicare fraud, right now that looks like that'll be going to trial in the fall. Just a lot of much bigger and more complicated cases in federal court. I really enjoy practicing up there because of that. And then in state court, a lot of my trials recently have been for sex crimes, especially allegations of sex crimes against children. And people will often look at me and say, Jason, I have two daughters. They say, hey, Jason, how can you possibly be a father and represent somebody that's been accused of that? And I tell them all the time that the number one type of crime that I've seen truly false allegations in are child sex crimes. And there's almost always some kind of family dynamic that's involved there, often split families and custody disputes and things of that nature where two sides of the family are fighting against each other. Well, if that's the case, what is essentially the ultimate leverage that you could have in a situation like that is an allegation against the other side for some kind of sexual abuse. And that's what I've seen stem false allegations and ones where there's even, where it's recanted later, the child is saying, no, I lied about that. I mean, when I'm not talking about not guilty here, I'm talking about truly innocent. And those are different things.
Wow. So you have a really broad array of cases that you take. why not specialize in one thing and kind of and do a bunch of different types of cases?
So I do specialize to a certain extent. The federal court's certainly a specialization. The sex crimes, certainly a specialization. The DWI, same thing. All three of those are all kind of highly technical areas of criminal law, and there are attorneys that say, I just don't want to do that. A lot of my sex cases, especially out of Jefferson County, are referrals from other attorneys that do criminal law. And it's either that's just not the right case for them, that's not something that they want to deal with the prosecutor's office that they're dealing with every day because they're ugly, knockdown, drag out cases. So they'll call and bring me on board to do the heavy lifting and kind of the dirty work for some of those trials. So I really do kind of specialize in those specific areas, but the skills that I have really branch out to all areas of criminal law.
And so, like, how many cases are you juggling at any given time?
I'd say about 80. And that's going to go from a traffic ticket would be one file, and then the Medicare fraud case that's going to trial probably in the fall, it's 40,000 documents that have been turned over to us, would be one of those 80 files. So, they're definitely a wide gamut of what those files look like. But I'd say at any given time, probably about 80 is my case.
Sounds like a lot. Is that considered a lot?
I think it's all a matter of kind of relativity.
Oh, it's all relative. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
If I don't have any associates working for me, I prefer my clients to be able to have me handle their cases for them. I think that's very important to my clients. That's a discussion that we have when they hire me. Different offices do different things. Some have many associates, so they'll then, of course, have to have almost 80 cases per associate, that kind of thing. They'll need the bigger caseload to be able to pay the salaries, justify it, get benefit from it.
And so is there an example that comes to mind when you're talking about, false allegations in a case, not just sex crimes, but something that was maybe just some really serious allegations and you uncovered that it was just the client was truly innocent and not just not guilty?
So I had a federal case that was really interesting. I really liked this one. My client lived in not a great area of North St. Louis. He had a nice car. He had a Dodge Charger that was out front. So that's kind of, in that type of a neighborhood, oh, this guy might have some money, can make you a target. He was at home with his girlfriend. He was in the kitchen. She was in a bedroom. And 5 guys broke into the house. 5 armed guys broke into the house, took him to a bedroom. One of them went back with the girlfriend. And at some point, my client overpowered the guy he was in the bedroom with and got his firearm from him. And my client shoots and kills the guy. Then he walks out, and there were 3 guys were in the kitchen. He shot into the kitchen and kills 2 of them. The 3rd guy ran out. My client then goes to get his girlfriend, and he has an actual shootout with the other guy in the hallway. And my client gets shot through the leg, but he gets the guy, and the other guy dies. The girlfriend runs out. She runs right to her car, gets in her car, drives away as fast as possible. I don't blame her at all.
Right.
And so my client actually ends up calling 911. He's shot. There's 4 dead people in his house. He calls 911. They come out. They do the full investigation. They take his statement, and he tells them what happened. And the cop goes, "Oh, so you want us to believe that you John Wicked all these guys?" I love that quote. That was always one of my favorite quotes.
Was it a direct quote from
from the cop.
Yeah.
And so they don't charge him with murder because it's pretty clearly self-defense. It could have probably gone either way. It wasn't charged as murder, but he was a felon. And because he had a gun when the cops got there, the feds decided to charge him with felon in possession of a firearm. Self-defense is not a defense for felon in possession of a firearm. Self-defense is only a defense against assault or murder or that kind of thing. Now, there is a defense called duress or necessity, essentially saying he had to commit this crime. He had to possess that firearm. Otherwise, his life would have been in substantial risk. Based on the story, that very much fits the case. But that case made it close to trial. We got within 30 days of trial in that case, and the feds actually dismissed it, which is not something the feds do very often.
I was going to say, they do not do that.
And that case was fully dismissed, and I think properly so. I mean, very justifiable.
And so the firearm in question, was it the guys that he took, or
That's
so
correct.
He didn't actually have
He did not have a gun in the house.
one of his own guns in the house. So, I mean, yeah, off the face of it, you're like, yeah, I think there would be a lot of skepticism on him actually doing that. Like 4 guys come into your house and you somehow...
Well, and the cops, they had their theories, right? Oh, he was selling drugs. They came for the drugs. This was drugs involved because of the neighborhood in the area. There was just simply no evidence of any of that.
Wow. So the John Wick case.
The
and
John
when
Wick
when
case.
did that happen?
Gosh, it was pre-pandemic. I'd say 2018.
I was gonna say because it doesn't come to mind, but
Because
yeah,
it was
that is-
dismissed, it really didn't get much media attention.
yeah, one
I
of those
know
things.
the Post-Dispatch had reached out to me and wanted the police reports and things of that nature, but because it was dismissed, I really wasn't at liberty to give them those things.
So they had reached out to you because I guess it was still active investigation, so you don't have a lot in that. In Missouri, at least, the open records during active investigation can be fairly limited. So
And that's exactly right. And then because it was dismissed, I guess it wasn't available to them after the fact anyway. I know they were very interested in writing about it, and usually I'm happy to give my client's side of the story to the press, but that wasn't the right case for it.
Right, once it's dismissed, I guess if you're that person, you're probably like, all right, I'm ready to, be done with it and just kind of live my life. And when something like that is in the media, of course, there's, everybody's going to have their own opinion on what happened.
And it's always going to be there for a Google search.
Right. And, people often jump to conclusions is, one thing you find.
Well, like the police with the drugs.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that's one of the stories that you've told on TikTok, right?
Yes.
That story. And so that's kind of like, that's one of the things, like, people go to your page and they're like, criminal defense attorney, I'm sure he's got some good stories. And you tell something like that, it's like, wow, like it's an unbelievable story that's real life that you get to kind of share with people on a platform like that. Like, I think that's, one of the coolest parts of TikTok is that you just can see in a bunch of different worlds.
No, you're exactly right. And I tell people all the time, there's a reason that they make so many TV shows about law, especially criminal law. It is wildly interesting. And sometimes we're dealing with a segment of the population that most people aren't exposed to. And certainly a process in the courts that people think that they understand but really don't know how it really works. And to be able to tell my stories on TikTok is nice, but I also like to try to, just tell them what it really looks like, what this really is, and certainly give advice and information along the way if I can.
What are some of those other stories that have gotten a lot of attention on TikTok, the real life case stories?
So I had a case where this poor vice president of a school, this dog wanders into the school. It was on the grounds, kind of around the school, and they knew it was from somewhere close by. They knew that the dog didn't look like it was being cared for properly. And the owner finally came and got it, and they were like, hey, please just make sure the dog doesn't come on campus. Like, please make sure this doesn't happen again. Surely enough, a couple weeks later, it happened again. My client was a big-time animal lover. Again, didn't think that the dog was being taken care of properly. So she took it to the vet, paid for the vet visit out of her own pocket, brought it back, and then was leaving with it again when the owners had called the police, and the police show up, and she kind of explained what was happening, and she was arrested for and then later charged with stealing an animal, which is a felony. Fortunately, we were able to discuss that situation with the prosecutor's office, and the charges were dismissed. She had 1 year of what's called diversion, which just means she couldn't get in trouble for a year, which was not a problem. This lady never been in trouble a day in her life, was just trying to do the right thing for the dog.
Right.
Was absolutely mortified. It was only frustrating to me because that's a case I didn't want in the media at all, right? I just wanted to keep a low profile for her, get it through the prosecutor's office, get it dismissed, and be done with it once all the facts came out. And the day it was charged, the prosecutor's office sent something to the media, and I get a call from Post-Dispatch at the time on a Saturday morning saying, do you want to make a comment on this? And I was like, well, if you're running the story, I absolutely do.
Right.
Because I feel like we're in the right for once. I often don't get to have the moral high ground in my cases.
I was going to say, that's a good feeling, isn't it?
Right. So to have the moral high ground, I was like, and good facts, yes, I will happily talk about all of this. And I wanted her side of the story out there for that same reason. If people Google the case, I wanted them to be able to see both sides of the story.
Yeah, it's always, it's interesting when, because there have been a couple of times when a criminal defense attorney has said, like, I don't say this often, but I really think, my client's going to be found innocent, or the charge is going to be dismissed or whatever, and you're like, okay, mistakes happen sometimes, and this might be one of those cases.
Well, there's mistakes, and then there's simply sometimes the evidence doesn't show up the way that a prosecutor needs it to, right? So there's a difference between being innocent and being not guilty, right? Being innocent means you really didn't commit the crime at all. Being not guilty means that the prosecutor doesn't have the evidence to prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now in court, they're the same outcome. Kind of justice-wise and morally, there's a different story there. But our court system, which is what I operate in, is all about guilt versus not guilt. It's not about innocent. So it's either they have the evidence and they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, whether at trial or whatever, and it's guilty, or they don't and they dismiss prior to trial, or we go to a trial and get a not guilty because they simply didn't have the evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
And in the case of the dog, did the owners have to be willing to press charges for the prosecution to even have a case? Like if they said, oh, no, it's no problem, there probably wouldn't have been a case to begin with, right?
Yeah, it's not their choice. It's the prosecutor's choice at the end of the day, but they would have been a valuable witness for the prosecution,
Right.
and without them being willing to testify, then the prosecution probably wouldn't have had a submissible case.
Yeah. I didn't realize stealing an animal was a felony. I thought that was a misdemeanor.
Stealing under $750 is a misdemeanor, except for a variety of things. Stealing a gun is a felony. Stealing an animal is a felony. And I don't have a problem with that law. I've got 2 dogs and a cat. If one of them was taken, absolute felony.
Yeah,
absolute felony.
Then it's okay to be a felony. I was going to say, well, so my dog was a couple $100 at Stray Rescue, and that's only because she was a puppy. If not, she would have been like $50. So, less than $750.
Right.
the
the actual
bargain dog.
value we look at, but we know our pets are invaluable.
My dog is priceless. Yes, absolutely. No, that's interesting. I mean, there's just so many crazy things that happen day to day, and St. Louis surely is no exception to that. We look at the state courts every day and just browse and look for what's out there, and there's a small fraction that we actually report on. But there's always something that's...
Oh, every day in the courthouse is a new thing. I mean, no 2 days are the same for me almost ever, right? Whatever the case I'm working on is, whatever I stumble into and get to see in court, all of those things. It's one of the things I absolutely love about what I do is that it's always fresh. It's always interesting. The new cases that are always coming in, I mean, almost nothing is cookie cutter, right? There's always interesting facts to all of these cases, and it makes what I do great.
And so... With TikTok, do you actually get business out of that?
That's a great question. So when I started, I just thought, hey, I want to put some stuff up and see how viable this is. And my first one was just me holding my phone at my desk, no microphone, no nothing, telling a story about another case that I just heard about at the courthouse, but it was pretty interesting. And it got 23,000 views, just like that.
The first
one I ever did. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, okay, this is a thing. This is viable.
Right.
So then I started to do it more just to kind of see what it was all about, right? And it took a while, but people started calling or reaching out through my DMs and say, hey, this happened to me, or I've got this case, or even just questions. I'm answering questions for people all the time about different laws through TikTok, and it's great engagement. It's a really great community, but more and more people are calling directly from TikTok and hiring me or saying, hey, I saw you on TikTok, or my mom saw you on TikTok. And those clients have been great for me because they really, I think, have an opportunity to know who I am before they ever step foot in my office. It's not like just reading a website or something plain like that, or a 30-second scripted commercial, right? At this point, if they've watched multiple videos, I think they've got a pretty good feel for who I am, what I stand for, how I go about my business, and they're great fits, and they turn into really good clients.
Yeah, no billboards needed, just
Right.
TikTok.
Because how much can you tell from a billboard, right?
Right. It's all the billboards are always the personal injury lawyers. That's their thing. They've taken up all of them. You can't no space for the criminal defense attorneys. And so, how many followers do you have on the page now?
About 28,000, I want to say.
Dang, that's pretty good, man.
Thank you.
That's pretty good. And so you post pretty regularly because I guess there's an algorithm obviously, and you're trying to follow that to get traction on it, and you probably have to do once every couple of days, right? To maintain it.
In an ideal week, I'd be doing 4 or 5. I really haven't gotten much traction on the weekends, so I really don't do stuff during the week and then post it on the weekends. And as the algorithm changes, I might play around with that and try those things as well. Posting in the evening for me has always been a better time than when people are at work during the day. Those just initial engagements with people tend to drive the algorithm. So if people are at home and resting and are able to see it and engage with it, and not just scroll through it quickly. I think that helps a lot. But a lot of weeks I'm only doing 1 to 3. So I'm always wanting to up my game a little bit, but I also don't want to. I don't want to put a TikTok just to put up a TikTok.
Right.
But I always try to have something to actually talk about. I posted one yesterday. I had a federal sentencing on a felon in possession case in federal court yesterday afternoon, and it was a contested sentencing. Government was asking for 41 months. I was hoping for 24. The recommended guideline or the sentence was 37 to 46 months, and I just kind of did a TikTok explaining all of that, explaining the arguments I was planning to make for my client, and just this is kind of what a federal sentencing really looks like.
And so there was one other case that I think you talked about on TikTok that was a witness that ended up getting arrested in the middle of a trial. I just remembered that one. Can you tell that one?
Absolutely. This was a while ago. This might have been like 2015. It was a child sex case in St. Charles County. I did not want to try this in front of a jury because my client looked the part. Right? The evidence wasn't there. It was a very weak case, but my client looked right out of central casting for this guy touches kids. And a jury anywhere, but especially in St. Charles County, I wasn't having any of that. I knew a judge would be able to sit there and actually listen to the evidence and not just look at him and go, you did this. So we're trying that case, and of course I do my due diligence before any trial on all the witnesses, run backgrounds to the extent I can, look at social media. I mean, anything that I can use in trial, I'm going to look at and see what I can find. And I found out that the accuser's father, who was going to be probably the star witness for the state, had a bench warrant out for him for missing a municipal court date in St. Charles. And so I just printed it out and kind of kept it in my back pocket. I finished questioning him when he was called to the stand, and I asked to approach. And the judge said, okay, come on up. And I said, Judge, I just wanted to let you know I'm going to hand this, and it was the piece of paper with the warrant printed out, to your bailiff. And the prosecutor goes, well, what is it? I said, oh, it's a warrant for the witness's arrest. She was like, I object. I'm not trying to enter it as evidence. I'm not trying to do anything with it in the court. I just thought the judge should know what was going on in his courtroom. And the prosecutor kind of looks at the judge. I kind of look at the judge, and the judge goes, well, go ahead, Mr. Korner. So I hand it to the bailiff. I sit down. Then the prosecutor gets a chance to re-question the witness. But while she's doing that, the bailiff's radio in his little shoulder radio, checking if the warrant's still active. And it was. So the second that he finished testifying, he stood up. Both bailiffs went over, put him in handcuffs, and took him out the back door because of the active warrant for his arrest. And I really think that did a number on his credibility as well. My client was found not guilty in that trial by the judge.
And so how risky do you think that move was to...
So I could never do that in front of a jury because the jury doesn't get to see things like that, and that would create what's called a mistrial. The jury's not going to get to hear about anything like that, see anything like that. That's why I didn't try to enter it into evidence. That wasn't the appropriate use of it. But in a bench trial, where the judge kind of sees everything and can set aside stuff that he's not supposed to see or hear, technically, I was able to do that. There might have been other ways I could have gone about it with the jury, but not in any kind of effective way that would have helped the trial.
Man, yeah, that's that's an interesting way to go after the witness's credibility, I guess.
I mean, you take what's given.
Right. So that's just like, just doing homework, I guess, as much as you can on the witness, because I guess you have to look at any way that witness might not be as credible as the prosecution is trying to make them out to be. You can use that to your advantage. Right?
Yeah, the classic one is inconsistent statements, right? That one time they said the car was red, one time they said the car was blue. Well, what color was the car? You really don't know. Those are your classic ones, inconsistent statements, either that they've made or that they've said and then told somebody else. That's the easiest way to go after credibility. But certainly, yeah, there's definitely other ones. In this case, it was the warrant.
This one, probably a unique one. I assume there's not many cases where that's happened in the middle of a trial.
I've never seen it again in my career, but I always look. I always look.
Right. Is there anything else you think was worth mentioning or that I didn't ask?
I already talked about, and I think that people just don't understand this. The question that I get asked the most is, how do you defend those people? And I'm like, and it's widely prevalent. They don't understand who those people are. 90% of my clients are really good people that had a bad incident happen. One bad night, one poor decision, things like that. I always tell the story about, a grandmother at a Christmas party, was driving home in Town and Country. She probably had half a glass of wine too much, She clips the corner of a curb, cop's right behind her, pulls her over. She's like 67, no criminal history in her life. She calls me. She just wants to make sure her license is going to stay good so that she can go and babysit her granddaughter every day when her daughter's at work. And those are the kind of people I represent the majority of the time. It's people like that that just have a hiccup in life and they need assistance getting through it and to minimize the long-term damage as much as possible. Now, 10% of my clients are what people are thinking that they are. Those tend to be the more interesting cases too, though, right? The cases that kind of we've been talking about, those tend to be the more interesting cases, but I do it for the system. I do it for the process. Without good defense counsel, the system doesn't work and it breaks down entirely. Even on a case where my client pleads guilty. Yesterday's case is a perfect example, the felon in possession. He pled guilty. Yes, I did this. The argument was about how much time he deserved, right? And the prosecution was asking for 41 months. I was asking for 24, which I knew was a big ask. The recommended sentence started at 37. The judge settled on 37 at the end of it, but after a lengthy sentencing hearing where both sides were heard, without us, of course the judge would have given 41 months. That's the only thing he would have heard, right? So the balance in the process is important, and just the more that it is litigated, I feel the more facts come out and the more justice comes to light.
Well, thanks for your time. That was a really interesting conversation.
No, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and watching Backstory STL. We're going to take a short break, but we'll start publishing episodes again in about a month or so. Until then, check out all the other episodes if you haven't yet. They're on FirstAlert4.com, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.